All right, welcome back, Generals and Admirals. This is General Johnny, and today we are going over the first 3 of 19 maps for Broken Arrow, and that's going to be Baltiisk, Bay of Winds, and Black Coast. So we'll go through each of these maps, and kind of the way we'll do it is we will go over the basic dominant strategy for each of the maps so you guys kind of know what the basics are, and then you can kind of plan and adjust with whatever works best for your team or however you want to play each of these maps. But before we do, we'll go through the agenda. So the agenda today, we're going to do a quick introduction. It's going to be a little bit different for this video, but we will have follow-on videos covering the rest of the 19 maps where we'll go straight into it and start covering the maps. But today we'll do a little bit longer of an intro, and then we'll do each of the maps. We're going to go through the macro strategy, actually on a different map tool, and then we'll do the micro strategy, looking at it on the tool that I have pulled up right now, which is what I'm going to lead into right now with the introduction of the map viewer. And this is actually developed by InConnector. He's a player on Broken Arrow, but he also developed this tool as a website, and it is really stinking awesome, I'll tell you that. You can do a lot of things, and I think my favorite kind of tool here is going to be the line of sight tool. So you can either put down a line of sight, or you can hold down Alt just like in the game, and get a live line of sight based off your cursor. Now, I'm not going to go through all how to use this tool and everything today. I'll probably do a separate video, kind of like the one I did last, covering the map strategy, which is really going to be the first 2 videos in this map series, and then we're going to do all 19 maps, like I said, starting out with the first 3 today. So we'll have plenty of time to cover all that, but what I really want to get into today are the 3 maps. Also, just be on the lookout. So as we post the full live videos of the maps, we will also post a short version, so like a YouTube short of each of the dominant basic strategy again for each of the maps, probably just from the micro view, maybe some of the mostly from the macro view, and maybe some from the micro view. So without further ado, before we get started, please like and subscribe to General Johnny Strategy, especially if you're into Broken Arrow content, but we also cover all strategy content on this channel. But please find a way to support us. We are partnered with BAArmory.net. We are partnered with Map Viewer by InConnector. And we also have a Patreon, and we also stood up a Discord. So if you're looking to join a community or get easy access to these tools, they're all hung on the Discord. War Room is what it's called. It is an open invite, so you guys can join and get in on the action and work with other BA fans and win some games. So without further ado, we'll get on into the maps, and we're actually going to back out here, and I'll show you guys real quick what I'm talking about. So BA Armory, now if you go here onto BA Armory, you can easily access into the rest of the map. So it is directly connected to Map Viewer by InConnector. So just wanted to show you guys that before we get started with our first map. So our first map is going to be Baltiisk Peninsula. This is actually a very infamous map, but we'll go through the basics. So there are a total of 8 objectives. So here are the point distributions. In order to get 1 victory point, you're going to need to get 5 objectives, 2 victory points, 6 objectives, and then all 3 victory points. You're going to need a majority of 7 objectives to get that. We have the assumed red objectives, the contested objectives, and assumed blue objectives. So as you can see here, both teams start out presumably with 2 objectives each, with 4 contested objectives, and we'll talk specifically about hotel as well on this map analysis. So we're going to look at this from the perspective, and I'm going to call this in the north the red team and the south and a blue, and you'll see in a second why. So for the north team, the general strategy is, and really for both sides, you're going to double up on Charlie, you're going to double up on Alpha, and you're going to single up on Bravo. And then one of your players, doesn't matter who, 1 through 5, is going to go from to hotel, okay? And that's going to be both on the north and the south side for both the red and the blue team. So from left to right on the red team, player 1 will be splitting its priority from Foxtrot, which is a given red point, onto Charlie. The second player will be primarily focused on Charlie with ability to flex over to B if need be. The third player will be the singular player on objective B, and then your player number 4 and 5 from the red team are going to be on objective Alpha. From the south perspective of this map, you're going to have player 1 again be responsible for golf and then double onto Charlie. Player 2 in the south is going to be purely Charlie, but also able to flex onto Bravo if need be. Player 3 will be purely Bravo. Player 4 and Player 5, again, will be doubling up on Objective Alpha. And then again, from the south, one of those 5 players can send a contingency force over to Hotel. So looking at these objectives, let us just for a second forget about Hotel, because this is going to require an air assault or an airborne operation. Possibly you can do amphibious assault onto the island. However, that's going to take much longer unless you're coming from Golf or Foxtrot, but most people air insert into Hotel. But we'll forget about that for a second. If we just look at the contested points, right, we are going to have 3 Charlie, Bravo, and Alpha, and then 2 on the red side, 2 on the blue side. Okay, so if we're looking at it from that perspective, you need all 3 of these objectives in order to get 1 victory point. Again, that is without even looking at Hotel. In order to get 2 victory points, you're either going to have to grab a given enemy point. So for the north, that's going to be either Golf or Delta. Okay, and in order to get all 3 victory points, you're really not going to get all 3 or all mainland points rather. So that's why we're going to go and look over at Hotel. So if we have Hotel, we only need 2 of the contested points to get 1 of our victory points. If we grab, let's say, Delta or Golf, at that point, you're going to probably be up on kills as well. So from the northern perspective, in order to get the 2 victory points, we're really going to want to have just all 3 of the middle points and Hotel. Okay, and then for the 3 victory points, which is probably going to rarely happen on this map unless it's just pretty much a beatdown on one side or the other, you're going to have Hotel, the 3 middle points, and then 1 of the assumed blue points. And then from the other way around, and there's really no huge advantage, I would say, across these 3 middle points. They're pretty evenly distributed. I would say, if anything, the north might have a slight advantage over the south on Charlie, depending on the map, or depending on the side, Russia or US. And on Alpha, I would argue that the northern side has a slight advantage on Alpha as compared to the southern side. So for the north side, again, you have your 2 assumed points. Or from the south side, you have your 2 assumed points. You can either take all 3 and you can get your 1 victory point there, or you can push on to Foxtrot, is probably the most accessible point that you're going to get. Usually Echo is a little too difficult to get, so that's how you can get your 2nd victory point, again, without having Hotel. And then the most plausible way of getting all 3 victory points is going to be having Hotel, all 3 of your middle points, and then also Foxtrot. So that is kind of the basic strategy, and we'll go into the micro at this point. So here we are on the map viewer. We're going to go through kind of some of the micro points, starting out from the south side. Again, we have our player 1 who's going to go here into Golf. Okay, so they should really put just like a contingency bare minimum force over in Golf. So these buildings, you can usually put snipers in, a little bit of AA units, some man pads, and then maybe an infantry unit or 2 just in case they do end up crossing. But usually if they do cross, you can send in a helicopter, you can send in some other force to kind of be a QRF there. And then again, player 1 is going to focus on helping onto Charlie. So the main thing to know is this whole entire corridor right here is going to be difficult to move up into, and it's primarily because of the high rises right here that the north side is going to have that advantage. So it's going to be very difficult to really push up to the north through this. So you're going to use these buildings and you're push into kind of the west side of Charlie to really take that. And then your player 2 is going to use this wooded area as kind of a base camp. A lot of people put their support roles either back here in the rear, or right here, or up on these kind of hilltops. Just be careful, because these are going to be really pre-designated areas. There's not a whole lot of area to hide in. I mean, there is a lot of forest, but a lot of times people will bomb these forests kind of with clusters or whatever, or what have you, and it can really mess up your support if you're too reliant. So maybe spread it out along this, this road too, and kind of share the space as well. But player 2 is really just going to go into the urban fight. All right, I really advise that whoever's playing on player 2 kind of establish in these buildings here, kind of establish in this building as well, and get a line set up before you actually push into Charlie. Again, the difficult part is, especially with the tornadoes and those kind of artillery, is it's going to be pre-designated on Charlie. So a lot of times people like to cap Charlie, and they'll sit on the backside of Charlie, either side that has it actually captured, and then as the enemy pushes in, let's say I'm sitting on the backside of Charlie here, and as the enemy actually comes into from the south into Charlie, basically, they're going to artillery them as they get into the middle there with a pre-designated target. So just be aware of that. Also, the enemy from the northern perspective, right, is going to have a little bit of an advantage in the fact that they're going to have this high ground here, which is really good for Shored as well. You do have, obviously, the high ground here and here on the south side. They're just not as good of line of sights, in my opinion, having played this map before. Okay, so that is basically what is going to be going on in Golf and Charlie, and we'll hit Hotel last. But from the Bravo perspective, over here in Bravo, it is going to be a pretty even fight. Across the board, it's really just 1v1, but from the northern perspective, it is a little bit more difficult, in my opinion, because you're either going to go really slow through this kind of forest area, or you're going to have to kind of expose yourself right here, mainly in this intersection. And this area that I have blocked off here is going to be kind of an open area where a lot of people like to spam ATGMs and do a lot of other things that are going to make it difficult to reinforce into Bravo, unless your player 4 and 5, and this is on either side, are really controlling these wood lines, controlling, these high rises in the south, is a huge thing or huge advantage. Whoever has those high rises south of Alpha are going to be able to control a lot more of this middle area, but also all of these buildings are really, really important. Any one of these buildings, if you can kind of establish your dominance in that area, you can set up ATGMs, you can set up man pads, you can set up all sorts of things that are going to make it difficult, again, to reinforce onto Bravo, and then also reinforce onto Alpha from either side as well. So it's really important to kind of dominate this yellow area when you're talking about from Bravo and Alpha perspective. So anyways, from the north side, again, I would usually come in through the woods here. You're going to have a fight in the forest, in this forest here, kind of to the northwest of Bravo, so get ready for that. It is important to kind of dominate that as Bravo player to own this intersection, and then also the backside of Bravo. So that's really important as well when you're looking at it from there. Also, you can kind of set up some AT infantry in this building, and that makes it more difficult for the southern player to approach from the east. So that is kind of the strategy on Bravo. Let's go take a look at Alpha. So from the Alpha perspective, it's going to be definitely double up on Alpha, and there's really two lanes to Alpha. You want to try avoiding, at least from the north, going through this choke point as much as possible. And again, it really depends how well the other team's doing, but let's just say it's just on average they're contesting Alpha, no one side is pushing past Alpha. If either of the sides win and they push past the far side of the Alpha point, so it would be about here for the northern side, or about here for the southern side. If they get to those 2 points, it's going to be really, really difficult for the other side to recapture Alpha. I mean, it definitely is possible, but you're definitely out of position. I'll show you in a second why here. But as you're going into Alpha, the number 4 player is going to want to pretty much avoid this choke point and take an approach either straight into the buildings or even use the woods and then go into the urban area and then take the backside of Alpha and push up however you need to. But you really cannot be approaching from this main avenue, mainly because of the high-rise buildings here. So just keep that in mind as you're approaching from the number 4 position. From the number 5 position, a lot of people, and it really is up to you how far out you want to play this, a lot of people put artillery AA over here, and then they'll approach into the forest all the way up here, support their other Alpha player from the forest into support their other player on Alpha from the forest into the eastern side of Alpha. So that is definitely one way to do it. I would suggest bringing a lot of forest fighters. You are going to be fighting the forest a lot if you're on either side of Alpha as the 5 player. And then also artillery and airstrikes onto Alpha. They're going to clump up a lot of infantry. I've seen it a lot of times is people will clump up infantry in the forest or actually on Alpha itself. So those are just kind of some of the micro tips on Alpha. And then again, one more thing is if from the southern side, let's say the southern side does push up and they own, they put some ATGMs or javelins in this building, they put some ATGMs in this building, they can put some SHORAD, or not building, but forest line, they can put some SHORAD here, and then they can put a pair of snipers here. And what it ends up becoming is any ground reinforcements, the fastest way to ground reinforce, obviously being here, is just going to get absolutely destroyed. With if that's a combination of ATGMs, if javelins, long range AT, things that just destroy transports, or even if you have tanks or whatever you need or whatever you have, if they're in this forest line and in these buildings, it's going to be impossible to reinforce without some serious effort and kind of changing the tide. So that is from of course south going into the north, and then we'll hit kind of what it looks like the north going into the south. Actually, we can do that right now. So if you go from the Alpha position and you take, let's say, these high rises, right, it's going to be really difficult for the southern positions to go through this choke point and then also across this field. So those are kind of the really important areas because if you have those high rises, again, you're just going to own this kind of blue engagement area, and blue is not going to be able to reinforce very easily. And also, likewise, if you own this forest line, again, they're not going to be able to push through here. And if you're really dominating, you're going to push as the northern player or the red player in this scenario down south into this wood line. So just be aware of kind of that, those two scenarios kind of playing out because those kind of are the worst case and most difficult scenarios are going to be on Alpha. All right, so that is pretty much everything from, Golf, Charlie, Bravo, Alpha. So all of your main points in contention as far as the micro terrain. We'll go over here and hit Hotel real quick as well. So Hotel is kind of interesting in the, vanilla gameplay. I don't know if they're going to add in the PTE, Conquest or whatever game version that they were going to have into the game. But for right now, Hotel, again, it really just dictates how much you dominate or need to dominate in order to win points on the mainland. So again, if you want even one victory point, you're going to have all 3 challenge points. You're going to have all 3 of those. So Hotel is kind of an easy win on that. What I would suggest, right, is if no one goes for it, so at the beginning of the game, people are going to be sending up their air attacks at the very beginning of the game, and that's really going to be what determines if you can send helicopters. If you win that air tax, you kind of own the right to send helicopters over to Hotel, drop off, and this is the thing, you're going to want to drop off as much AA infantry as possible, and don't go too overboard, because here's the thing, you're going to receive an income hit trying to sustain these units over here. So don't put an entire army over here, because then you're not going to be able to hold, whatever point you're at over in the mainland. So I would say, 2 to 3 AA infantry units, maybe 1 line unit or something that can hold off until you can send in, helicopters or whatever reinforcement airstrike that you need to, because most of the time they're going to either send in helicopters or they're going to airdrop. And airdrop is, pretty dangerous, because you can always send in ASF, you can always send in a pack, to kind of counter that. So the most likely form, unless you're going against Russia, right, is going to be some kind of helicopter onto the mainland. So if you don't have Hotel, the first phase, it's not the I've seen a lot of strategies where people spend the first phase establishing dominance on Charlie, Bravo, and Alpha, and then when this becomes more important in phase 2 and 3 and worth more points, then they go and they contest Hotel. Maybe they nuke it, maybe they send in whatever kind of attack helicopters or nowhere, at least find out where the AA infantry are, the man pads, and then they send in some bombs, precision bombs, and then they're able to take Hotel easily. So that's kind of everything you need to know on Baltiisk as far as the macro and the micro strategy. We'll move on to map number 2. All right, so next up on the agenda, we have Bay of Winds. So Bay of Winds probably isn't my favorite map, but it has a total of 9 objective points, all right? And you actually have 4 assumed points for both red and blue teams, all right? So red being this western side, blue being the eastern side of this, and you have 1 truly contested delta point. However, obviously, all these points can, in theory, be contested, all right? So Charlie, Golf is definitely up there, Hotel, and Bravo are all kind of contested points, although I did give them to assumed positions because most of the time these are the teams that will have the upper advantage and will have to defend rather than attack and take those points. So pretty interesting map here. We'll just start out from the 1 position on the west side. We'll go down through all the positions, and then we'll go from the eastern perspective. So from the west side or the red perspective, position number 1 is probably the most fun position, in my opinion, especially if you're playing a soft deck, so a SF deck, because you can really set up helicopters here. You can do a lot of air assault, stealth air assaults into basically this area here, or even later in the game, into Foxtrot and kind of catch your enemy off guard. But also really interesting part about the 1 position on both of these sides, or really just the west side, is there is no point. So you are just basically securing this entire flank and then putting pressure onto Bravo and Golf, all right? And then likewise, the 1 position on the east side will be defending that. So the number 2 position will be in charge of Hotel from the west side. The number 3 position will be in charge of contesting Delta, obviously capturing India. The number 4 position will be in charge of contesting Charlie, and number 5 position will either defend onto Alpha, help onto Charlie, or contest onto Golf. And from the eastern position or the eastern side, you're going to have the 1 position. They are going to obviously cap Foxtrot, probably leave a unit. This is probably the most important thing, is that they leave some kind of AA unit or something to kind of secure this from the enemy just sending over a helicopter and capping that later on in the game. The number 2 position is going to advance. They're going to secure Bravo, so they can either, kind of sit on Bravo, help secure that flank and kind of do a defense, or they can be aggressive and help onto Delta. Really, the way we have it kind of drawn up here, it is assumed that they are putting pressure on Hotel or Delta. The 3rd position on the east side, that's going to be contesting Delta. The 4th position on the east side will take Charlie and defend there. They will also help defend Golf if they need it. And then obviously position number 5 will be in charge of Golf. So really interesting. You can either play it this way, which is, I think, probably the way that's played most often, is 3 in the north on both of the sides, so north of this river, or you can play 3 in the south, but it really just depends what your team feels more comfortable attacking, the northern or the southern objective. So let's go on into the micro. We'll talk that for a little bit, and we'll move on to our 3rd map. So again, this is Bay of Winds. All right, we'll start out with the 1 position here. So from the 1 position, remember, they don't really have a point to fight over. But what's really interesting, and I marked out these 2 kind of contested areas. So whoever owns these 2 contested areas, and by own I mean whoever's occupying like the most buildings, and there's some really important buildings to kind of occupy here. So these buildings I just marked, so I marked the wrong things over here, but these 3 buildings over here are going to be really important, at least from the west side, if you want control over this middle. And then obviously, as you push up, I would just go building to building and establish your foothold right before this forest. And then if you are going to pressure onto Bravo, you're going to want to push up into these kind of buildings and kind of flank into Bravo like that. So that's kind of the foot trail if you're going to go there. And that can really be a combination of, and really it should mostly be whoever is on Hotel, if you want to do it like that, because the thing is, the number 1 player is going to have to, also I was wondering why this was so small, the number 1 player is going to have to, number 1, secure the flank here, right? So that's why SF is really good. You can always put up some killer eggs. You can put up an Apache, or sorry, not Apache, but a Comanche on this kind of northern flank, and it can really respond easily to any threat that comes down this road, or if they're trying to, assault with helicopters or what have you. But you're also be really important is to, maybe like send some Silent Hawks or air assault into this area. And the idea is that you set up your own man pad. So, think STT teams. think Ranger RRC. Okay, you set them up in these forests, right? And then you're able to establish a foothold, and then you can quickly reinforce with dropping more supplies or what have you onto this area, and then you can push these woods into the backside of Bravo. So that is probably the best strategy, and it can only really be done from the Western red team perspective. With something like SF from the US side. You cannot really do the same exact thing from the east side. You can still advance to the woods and cause kind of a problem here because they're obviously not going to want you, going into their back line, but you really don't pose the same threat just the way these buildings and everything are laid out. You don't have these kind of forests to advance through like you do from the Western perspective. So that's kind of everything on the one position. Again, I kind of talked about how to advance through these two open areas as well. So from the 2 position over here, you're really going to own hotel. There are a few buildings, like you can put some ATGMs here. You may want to put some infantry in these 2 buildings. But also keep in mind that there is this gap between hotel and delta that if the enemy is pressuring, you're going to have to help out on the with the player on delta, so the 3 player, all right? But it really just depends. If they're not getting pressured that much, then you can advance more. You can help advance more with player 1 onto Bravo. That's ideal case, ideal strategy, right? So that's everything really with the 2 position. All right. Again, really important to kind of maybe set up your support lines over here, maybe over here, be able to flex down. You really want to have these high rises, and you really want to have the force right past the high rises to get a foothold. You don't want them advancing into this forest and then pushing the high rises because the issue is once they own those high rises, they can put dual pressure onto hotel in the north, and then they can also put pressure onto delta again from those high rises. So very important there for the 2 position. From the 3 position, this is going to be mostly just like a slugfest, but you establish usually your lines here in these buildings. The Eastern player kind of has a tougher time, in my opinion. They are coming out of the woods, pushing into kind of what's assumed to be, this is going to be a contested point, but I would say if anybody has an advantage on this point, it's probably the Western player at first, and then pushing out of these woods, it becomes easier from the Eastern 3 player. So these woods are really hard to fight in. If you're fighting from the west side into the east, it's really hard to really push past deep enough to have any effect. So if you're going to be pushing east from the west side, I would really probably focus on Bravo and then just holding onto Delta, just the way this is set up. We'll talk about some of the high rises from the 2 and 3 perspective when we go over the eastern positions, but there's some pretty important stuff there as well. All right, so from the player number 4 on the western side, so you're going to advance. There's a lot of cover to kind of advance into this urban area and then smoke onto Charlie. Charlie's really not that difficult to take because it's kind of hard to assault as the eastern players into these 2 positions, and those cover you nicely on the approach to Charlie from the west. So the most difficult part is really crossing this small open area, and from the eastern side, they're going to want to have these woods. It's basically going to they're going to have those woods in order to do a defense at all, but they're going to also be challenged from this urban area over here. There are ways to kind of sneak in and, artillery, this wood line or what have you. But I've seen a lot of ATGMs. I've seen a lot of long range AT weapons set up here, making it pretty difficult to just take, this main avenue of approach. So that's pretty much everything from the 4 position. The 5 position, really interesting. I don't play this position enough, so it might not be the greatest advice here. But, I usually, if I am going to play this, I'm going to pretty much hold the alpha position. It is kind of difficult. You kind of have the same thing going on where you can use this urban area to kind of track up to Gulf, but once you get to Gulf, it becomes really difficult to hold it. And the reason why is because if you're holding the backside of Gulf, it's really just an open area, and everything on Gulf is a high rise. So if they have any units at all, which they will, anywhere around Gulf, they're going to be able to shoot those high rises and kill whatever's in it. So you're really exposed pushing onto Gulf. It's probably my least favorite objective to push. Again, I don't play it enough. Maybe there are other ways to do it, but just from my perspective, that is kind of why Gulf is so difficult to push from that side. And then also just keep in mind, you're going to want to control this flank. It's probably not too difficult to do, but I have seen a lot of flank play, especially in these forests, and they kind of end up just staring each other off, to be quite honest, in the southern area. But really important to note that as well. So that is everything from the Western perspective. The Eastern perspective, we'll go through a little bit quicker, but you're going to at least want to push up to here. You want to hold them, at this line. As soon as they start getting into your back line, into these forests, it's going to be really kind of hard to uproot them. So that is your kind of job as player 1 on the east side. Obviously, like I said, make sure you put some kind of AA unit over here. You could put an AA unit over here. You can do, if you're US and you're SF, you can do the kind of same thing where you cover this with helicopters, like the Killer Egg or what have you with the Stinger missiles. But it's really up to you to secure this flank, because this is an entire point and it's kind of vulnerable because there's so much space that they can really, send a helicopter or whatever, and they can kind of embed themselves in these forests and really kind of make this flank vulnerable. So just don't fall victim to that. But it's really not that difficult after you played it, a few times or whatever. So, and then obviously you want to control this wood line to start off, and then kind of push forward, right? You can start off the game and you can get some infantry embedded in these woods and kind of pose the same threat going the other way, or you can play it conservatively and take this first track pattern, and then obviously take those same buildings that we were talking about before, and then put pressure onto hotel. It is pretty difficult to push into hotel from in this box. So this box is like kind of a no man's land, right? Really difficult to fight there, but it is a lot easier if you're coming from these buildings and tracking into this side. Poses more threat onto hotel. So that is really the one perspective. From the 2 perspective on the eastern side, obviously take Bravo, help out with the number 1 player, kind of get into these high rises, and then you can help put pressure again on both hotel and delta. And then I'll mention this really quick too, is important to note these 2 or 3 high rises are really good. If you get ATGMs and recon in these buildings, they can shoot all the way into delta. They can hit pretty much anything that appears in this area that I'm marking off there. So those high rises are really important in maps like this, and just be aware of it, because if that is something that the enemy is doing, you can either smoke those targets or you can just artillery or bomb them or what have you. But it gets really frustrating when they keep on putting long range ATGMs, recon in those buildings, because it's really hard again to approach west to east to clear it out from there. Really, your best bet is going to be pushing into the forest, but that only happens after you get these 2 high rises. You guys are doing well enough, and then putting pressure onto Bravo. Then it becomes easier to attack those high rises there. So that is pretty much everything from the 2 position. From the 3 position, again, you have the advantage of these woods that are going to be kind of a backstop. So, once you get here, it's kind of hard to push, past this line right here, just because it gets so urban, and they can easily put some infantry here. Armor is really hard to push when there's that many houses like closely stacked together. So, this is again going to be a slugfest for whatever players are on Delta for both sides. Okay. For player position number 4 on the east side. All right. Again, we already talked. Own these woods. Put your AT infantry in there, long range, kind of cover this avenue approach. And then you can really just own the backside of this area here. I've seen people put ATGM carriers to help out their buddies over here, but there's plenty of ways to play this. I hate to say it, but like if you're gonna play support or whatever, play position number 4, because you can kind of hang back. You usually have your support areas over here with artillery or whatever, and then it's easy to hang out and just own Charlie on the backside, and then also have that force too as well. That's if they're not playing 3 players on the bottom and there's not immense amount of pressure or anything like that. So and then position number 5, again, I do not play this outside that much, but just know that you're obviously responsible for this flank. Like I said, Gulf is pretty, or should be pretty easy to hold unless you're getting double or triple teamed or what have you. Then it becomes an issue, and I think that's probably, if you go the other route where you triple up on the bottom, is you can double team onto Gulf, and if you have a mismatch here, right, that really exposes this southern side, and then it makes getting Charlie super easy. And once you control this southern side, so the area that I'm marking off right here is really hard to penetrate once you own that. So if you want to rush 3 people on the south side, that definitely is a strategy, at least from the western perspective. I wouldn't necessarily do it from the eastern perspective, because I think it's harder to take these kind of buildings and everything on the other side. So but that's just kind of my opinion. So defend however you want on 5, but just understand you kind of own this area in between as well. So you probably have the most like space if you're playing this just by yourself or just with 4. You're gonna own probably the most real estate right by yourself than any other player. So just keep that in mind. All right, so that is everything on the micro perspective on Bay of Winds. Now we're gonna move over to the last final map, which is going to be Black Coast. All right, so from the macro perspective on Black Coast has 10 points. All right, so it has 10 objective points. And we have 2 contested points. We have 4 assumed points for both the red and the blue teams. All right, nice and easy. We got the blue in the north and the red in the south. All right, in order to get 1 victory point, you need 6. 2 victory points, you need 7. And 3 victory points, you need a majority of 8 points. All right, so we're going to start out from, or just looking at the contested objectives, are going to be the flank objectives, which are Delta and Charlie. So I think this is probably everybody's least favorite flank positions to play. I don't know a whole lot of people that love playing these points, but if you are one of those people, then good on you, right? Not me, but I do like playing the middle here. There is a lot of urban action that goes on in the middle, but those are going to be, obviously these are all contestable points as well, but really these are the 2 points that if you're just playing the basic 1v1 on the flanks and 3 in the middle, then you're going to have these as contested points, and it's really just going to be whoever plays that flank better, unless you have some other strategy. Now you can also double up. Another strategy is to double up on the right flank, and contest and take all 3 of these points, and just kind of hold the middle with 2 people, hold golf hopefully. So they're not going to, but then that's probably going to give them Delta, or you can contest Delta. So if you do it that way, you have 3 points here, 4, 5, 6. All right, so you have 6 points, you have 1 victory point there. All right, and then if you get this, that's your second victory point. So that is one way. However, it's just going to be difficult if they play with the traditional way of playing this on both sides. It's just to have one flex player, right? It just kind of changes on where, if you're in the north, your flex player is in position 4. If you're in the south, your flex player can be, usually position 3. Okay, but that's kind of generally how this one goes. All right, so let's talk about each of the lanes. Just start out from the north side, nice and easy. You're going to go to hotel, you're going to cap hotel, and then you're going to go on to Delta. Now, this is a very long distance, so whoever has this, it's going to be hard to resupply. And I will say this, if you lose Delta, right, if you lose Delta from the north, and you're in this one position, a lot of times people will just hold on to hotel. Like if they are entrenched onto Delta, which a lot of times they will air assault onto here or airdrop or whatever, or they'll ground assault and they'll just establish a really good line. At some point, I would say, beginning of phase 2, like if it's not happening, it's not happening. All right, so just fall back to hotel, hold on there, and then help out, become more or less a support player. You can flex units over to Foxtrot, help hold Foxtrot while they attack into Bravo, and then maybe they can threaten this line, causing him to go back, and then you can advance onto Delta. So really interesting play on the 1 position from the north side. On the 2 position, the north side, you're going to take Foxtrot. All right, that's going to be your main point to hold. And then you're going to play there's a few ways that this can end up playing. It depends what the enemy does, obviously, but a lot of times they'll want to push, the enemy will want to push these woods with recon and try assaulting Foxtrot on this wood line. So you either got to meet them there and kind of do the same thing back and push the backside and the back force onto Bravo. You can do that, or sometimes they hang out and they just kind of defend right here and they support their third player pushing onto Foxtrot. That's another possibility. In that case, you're going to really spend most of your resources, and I would not. So if they attack you onto Foxtrot and Bravo are actually really easy to defend if you play it right. And by that, I mean, you want to use these buildings, right? You're going to put some AT infantry, some anti-infantry, and you just want to stack these buildings and really spread them out and make it really difficult for them to push up into there with vehicles or anything like that, right? So that's kind of the way you play it on position 2. Position 3 is going to be mainly your alpha player, right? So alpha is actually really easy to hold by yourself because you have, and we'll show it in the micro analysis, these buildings to kind of hang on to. It's important to note, if you are playing it like this, right, in theory you're going to have 2 players against 3 players, right? It really just depends how the enemy is playing it, but you need to make sure that you're kind of combining lines here, right? So the majority of your forces should be to the west of alpha, right, as player number 3, okay? Hold alpha and then to the west of alpha to help out Foxtrot, right? Because you have this flex player, position number 4, coming in between alpha, so they can either put pressure onto Echo, they can put pressure onto Juliet, but it really depends on, what your team decides to do, right? Or if they send 2 players over here, this flex player now becomes primarily onto Juliet, and they, can push Charlie and then eventually India. Or, if they're sending all 3 players to the middle, like we have in this area, all right, they're going to put pressure onto Echo, right? And they're going to own this right side of Alpha. This middle player is going to own the left side of Alpha, and then Foxtrot is just going to own Foxtrot. So that's kind of how it plays out there. And then player number 5, Juliet. So on both sides, these points are really hard and should not be capped. All right, unless you're getting double teamed. And even then, it really should be easy to hold this back line, this back force line. And the reason being is because this is also a really long distance, right? It looks different on the map, but this is a really long distance to reinforce all the way up into Juliet. So as long as you hold your point here on the right side, you're fine. If it is a 1v1 and you need to contest this, that is fine too. Both sides have kind of some advantages we'll talk about in the micro terrain analysis. But at the end of the day, just hold on to your point, contest Charlie if possible from that 5 position. All right, from the south, all right, you're going to have this 1 position, again, just to take Delta. Now, same thing works. If they own Delta and it's going to be really hard to push off, usually it's harder, I believe, for the north side to own Delta. It is a little bit easier for the south side to own Delta, again, just because of the micro, in my opinion. So, but if they do own Delta and, you can't get them out, then just fall back to Golf and then help, again, push onto Foxtrot or whatever you can do, play that support player, secure the flank, let them have this and spend the income point holding this while you spend income points on, attacking Foxtrot. So player number 2 is going to be on Bravo. Again, you can track into these woods, right? Good spot to put recon here. Track into these woods and threaten the back line. It's really kind of difficult and annoying to defend the back line of Foxtrot while you're also trying to defend this front line. But this area in between is going to be, they're going to have ATGMs on both sides, and AT, long range AT infantry kind of defending that. So just be aware of that. And then obviously you're in charge of holding Bravo. You're going to get a lot of pressure here often, especially if they decide to put 3 players. You're going to get a lot of pressure here and really in this forest in between. All right, player number 3, again, flex player, put the pressure on Foxtrot, put the pressure on Alpha as need be, okay? Let player number 4 own completely Echo, so they can, there's also some buildings here and some forests that's really easy to hold. Echo's pretty easy to hold, and at bare minimum, you should be able to hold the backside of it, even if they are putting a ton of pressure here, because the airfield is so open, it becomes really difficult to, flank this way. So a lot of it's going to be funneled between these 2 areas, and this becomes a choke point where you can artillery, you can do a bunch of things right here and kind of keyhole fight into this, and then you also have the forest and a bunch of other things to hold Echo. And then player number 5 in this strategy, the main thing is to hold this forest, hold your India. If you want to be aggressive, you want to hold this line here between Charlie and India. That's going to be your main line of defense. It's going to be difficult. The only other way they can go on the backside of here. But again, if you have the right defense set up, that's going to be pretty difficult to do. And then they also have this town back here. There's multiple ways to use that if you're on this flank. But I would, if it depends how hard they're pressuring over here, I would secure that as well. Okay, so that's everything for the macro strategy. Let's hop into the micro strategy. All right, so for the Black Coast micro strategy, we're going to start out on the north side with player number 1. And we're going to go ahead, grab the icon so we can kind of mark this out, make sure it's on the full size, not like last time. So, on the north side, again, it's going to be a 1v1. Obviously, take Hotel, contest Juliet if you can, right? If you end up losing that, you're just going to go back like we discussed before. And I'll kind of show you here the reason why the micro is so difficult on Juliet for the Eastern player is because the Western player can own this. And if they own this building as well, this building is very, very difficult because this open area is very difficult to push from the woods. It's very difficult to push at all from here because it's just so open. If you have any sort of AT infantry, long range infantry, it just becomes really difficult, especially if you have forces in here as well. So even if they smoke right in front of the building, you still get that side shot, and it's really ends up being difficult. And then also, you have these forests, right? So you have these forests. It's kind of hard to push, be aggressive with recon. A lot of times people put recon pushing, this way to the west, okay, from the east. But that's kind of easy to get spotted and kind of predictable too. So, and Juliet is already kind of closer, as you can see, to this western side, and it has a lot more, area where you can shield yourself, set up supply lines or whatever, and and then, approach nice and easily into Juliet, right? So if you are playing this position, on the north side, on the one position, and you're not getting Juliet, don't feel terrible about it. I wouldn't just give up on it off the bat. Like, a lot of times it is achievable. You can use these woods, you can smoke, like I said. Once you get this building, you can continue to turn that flank, and then you have likewise a nice area of approach with these guarded buildings. Sometimes it is kind of hard to approach here with helicopters or reinforcements if they have these buildings and everything, and then you can start putting pressure onto India. So it really just depends. Get a feel for it. If you're playing one of these flank positions, I would say learn how to play it before you volunteer to play it, because it is pretty difficult. Okay, moving on to position number 2, Delta. Okay, so I play this position a lot. Again, this is kind of the wooded area that we were talking about. Beware, because they're going to definitely try pushing infantry here. So, if you're playing US, I would definitely, bring some Marine Raiders, pair that up with, maybe just some normal Marines or some other AT kind of infantry, so that they can deal with whatever comes through this forest. Get some real good forest fighters. And a lot of times they like to bring some IFVs, especially now, because they can resupply, and they can sustain that push, right? And keep their infantry going into the back line, because once they get right about here, this entire back line is exposed, right? So and that's going to be your back line of Delta, right? So just keep that in mind. But, as a Delta player, you usually occupy these woods. I would occupy this, church with something, right? A lot of people expect that, so you might have to move it occasionally, but maybe some recon, maybe just put some recon and then occupy these buildings with some AT infantry, maybe some, AGLs or whatever you have, right? But it's really, in my opinion, kind of hard to push Delta unless you double team it or whatever, because of all these buildings and how difficult you can make it if you're properly defending it, right? From the third position, again, Alpha is also really difficult because you have this open area, right? This main open area, it is just so wide, and you can have ATGMs, you can have AT infantry that can shoot them, in this area, right? If they're in any of these buildings, they can shoot them. They get, left in, in the open, and then they're susceptible to all sorts of fire, right? And then even if they do push, sometimes, a lot of times, if they do push and they get a significant push and they occupy these buildings, you can just fall back to the backside right here and here, hold the objective, or even let them take the objective, that's fine, and then just kill them in the buildings, because now they're isolated and they still have to go across no man's land just to reinforce Alpha. So again, usually it takes more than one player, or the help of more than one player, to take Alpha from the south. All right, and then obviously, like I said, you're going to want to spread some infantry and show some support to Delta by helping them out to the west. To the east, you're going to want to have someone else, right? You're going to have someone else kind of take up this position, maybe even help you on Alpha, and you want them to really own this forest. There's a good building right here that you can kind of own, right? So there's plenty of things they can do to help you out. And then if you guys want to bring the action to Charlie, right, you can advance into these woods and then into these buildings, and then take the backsides here, and then assault, take the backside there. All right, the enemy is going to more than likely want to hold onto Charlie from this backside, but you can artillery it or whatever. They're also going to have these woods, and they're going to have these buildings as well. So that is just, if you're pushing into Charlie, that's kind of the expected path there. All right, so that is everything with the third and the fourth player. They're looking at, okay, so the fourth player too, with the defense in the woods, defense in the building. All right, if they need to help out onto Golf, let's say Golf is getting double teamed, that's fine. They can help out, they can go into the woods, they can send other assets, doesn't necessarily need to be ground assets to help out Golf. But in general, Golf should be pretty easy, because you have this wood line, right? That's going to be really difficult for the enemy, because it's so far away to put anything meaningful into Golf if you have, a competent player. So, just own these woods or whatever, own Golf if you want. If you're just going to be, kind of a hermit or whatever, know that they probably will they need, in order to even put pressure onto Golf, they're going to need to take this wood line, right? Or if you want to be an aggressive defender as, the lone player on position 5, if you're not getting the support, let's say, position 4 is going onto Charlie and they're not really helping you out, and maybe it's 1v1, or even if it is 2v1, and you want to just play aggressive defense, as I like to call it, then you're going to want to take these woods, right? And these woods are kind of dual faceted because it's going to be really hard for them to advance onto Echo. This whole entire area is super open, right? So presumably you're going to have some infantry or recon over on the right side. You're going to have, your guys over here on the left side, and then they're just kind of wedged in the open right there. And then also that prevents them from likewise pushing from west to east over into this open area. And it also makes it pretty difficult for them to push west to east, even across this road if you have these woods, right? So that's kind of the perspective from the position number 5. And while we're over here, we'll go position 5 perspective. Actually, we'll just reset. We'll go from the south, right? Over here in position 1 on Juliet. Again, kind of already talked about everything that had to do with Juliet, taking these woods, taking this building, right? Establishing your dominance early so that the player just kind of falls back onto hotel, and then you can become a support player, either bomb hotel. I would not, if you do have Juliet, and they're backed off like they should, because, they got repelled or whatever. You've already done your job at this point, all right? Don't make the mistake of pushing even further into hotel, because it's going to be really difficult. You're going even further, and look how much the distance is from here to here. It's really not that long, and we could actually tell you, this is one of the cool things about this tool, right? So I can tell you generally how far that is, right? 4,486 meters, okay? How far do we think this is, right? It is much further, right? Much further to that, roughly, and you could actually get a precise thing, that is 10,000 meters longer, all right? And this is another cool little feature here as well, is you can show it in time, right? So if you're doing 100 kilometers per hour, it'll take, a minute, right, to even get, all the way over to where you want to get to. So it's a pretty cool tool here. That is also part of InConnector's website. So anyways, you don't want to push onto hotel, all right, if given the chance. All right, now moving on to the next position, position number 2, Bravo. Bravo is interesting. I don't love playing Bravo. Again, you can be aggressive and push, in these woods or whatever, if you have the right loadout to do that. And then as soon as you get, right about here, okay, you start owning the back line and putting immense pressure, and then just coordinate that with whoever else is playing in the middle. You only really want to do that if you're playing 3 people in the middle. But Bravo should be pretty easy to secure. Obviously, you're going to get this wood line, put your recon, your ATGMs. You're going to have something in this wood line kind of covering this avenue approach. The real kind of difficult part is you also are partially responsible. If you don't have that middle player, you're completely responsible. But this approach here onto the backside of Bravo is what's really dangerous, right? So that's what I would look out for if you're defending Bravo. You already know they'd have to be kind of dumb to be assaulting straight through no man's land, right? Even with a bunch of smoke, there's just too many areas. If you have other things set up like here and here, which they often do, there's just too many angles, too wide open, and you can really find yourself getting stuck. So most of the time, the assault does end up coming through these woods, utilizing these buildings, and kind of coming on the backside of Bravo, which is very dangerous, because then they can start threatening real quick your support zone in the south, right? So that is everything from the 2 position. 3 position, again, your main idea is kind of to flex either to Delta or to Alpha or both, to put pressure with your teammates, right? So you are the main pressure player, because you don't have a dedicated point that you're defending. You're really just pressuring wherever need be, right? So these, be ready for this urban area is going to be pretty difficult to push in if Delta knows what he's doing. And then Alpha, obviously, this area is pretty difficult to push because there's, just a lot of open area. I would suggest kind of starting off by getting these buildings here that I'm marking, right? If you're in the south and you're in position 3 or 4, get all of those buildings established, because it's the same thing, right? It's really hard for them to push across. You can get line of sight down these, main avenue roads or whatever, and make it really difficult for them. But it's also really difficult for them to assault you in the middle if you establish yourself there. And then once you have your line set up, then you can decide to either push into Delta or push into Alpha, right? So I think that's everything with position 3. Position 4, let's see what we have going on in position 4. Position 4 is pretty easy to hold. Again, you can always hold the backside of Charlie. You can always set up something in this forest as kind of a secondary, front line. You really want to be in these buildings, right? And own this entire hangar area, I guess is what it is. You want to own those hangars. But if you do get pushed back, it's no reason to panic. You still have this wood line, and you also still have this wood line as well to kind of hold. But ideally, if you're pushed all the way forward position to attack, you want to have all these buildings or all these wood lines at least, and then this wood line as well, right? You can cause problems if you assault into this wood line. Kind of exposes, the flank of Alpha is a good place to start, or you can assault, straight head on. But I think most of the time success comes from kind of getting this woods first and then setting up your position onto Alpha. Also, really interesting to note, right, is if they're not aggressive enough, it's really easy to put like recon in these woods, and you can really just like laser artillery. I've seen that happen a lot of times, and people don't even realize it if they're not, actually pressuring enough onto Charlie. But, if this is played correctly from the northern perspective, they should be pressuring onto Charlie. All right, and then again, remember, player 4, you are responsible for this, right? So if your player over here, your lone player, is struggling, you need to flex over and help out. You can usually help out by going into the woods. You can usually help out by, just doing well in your position and preventing, this kind of reinforcement line, right? So do what you can from that position to kind of cover the middle. They should never really, and sometimes they will try sneaking, recon like snipers up the airfield or whatever, but they should never really be able to do anything like that because it's so open and so easy to cover, right? But with that said, if they do get between you, it's going to be a really nasty day because now you have an isolated player on F, especially if, these guys in the East are doing well. And, they're pushing, they're pushing over here onto Echo. They're putting on Foxtrot. It's going to be really bad if they split you guys in half here, and then they take this entire right flank. So just keep that in mind if you're playing in position 4. And then for position 5, really, really interesting, playing position 5 by yourself. So, it would be prudent to kind of put some recon, put something to hold this far right flank. That's how you would secure your flank, is really kind of owning this town, right? This is also a really good spot to put something, recon, ATGMs, and this is if you're just defending Foxtrot. And then obviously these woods are going to be the most important thing, defending Foxtrot. So you have a lot of land to cover. So, I would understand if you want to double up the size, definitely, strategy. But, you have a lot of real estate to cover here. So probably bringing helicopters, probably bringing SF, honestly, to cover this much land. And that's if you want to be defensive. Sometimes it's almost easier to be offensive, even if you're just one player here, because what you can end up doing is you can, establish a little foothold over there in that town, right? Air assault into Echo, and then once you own Echo, you can then set up this defensive line, which ends up being pretty easy to hold, right? And then if you have 2 players, as we discussed, you'd want to push into this forest, and then you'd want to flank over here on the right side, and then put pressure eventually onto Gulf, right? But that's going to be a very extended push. I don't know if it's necessarily worth it from that perspective, right? And then, if you're coming over here and you are taking Echo and you're trying to take over Foxtrot, all right, I think Foxtrot is a little bit more achievable than taking over Gulf, especially if you have a double team going on. So I hope I covered everything on this last map on Black Coast, but that should be pretty much everything from the macro and micro perspective. Again, we just covered 3 maps, but we will be covering, all 19 maps eventually. We'll probably do 3 maps at a time if we can, and hopefully we get a little bit quicker with it. But, I also hope that everybody kind of understands the general, again, dominant strategy on all 3 of these maps that we went over today. We will continue to release this. Again, shout out to InConnector on the Map Viewer, a phenomenal website to plan out your strategy and to really look at those line of sights and kind of, look at things that is really hard to take note of when you're actually playing the game. You can kind of step back and look at the map and kind of look at those angles using the line of sight tool. Like I said here, is really, really nice addition to this website. So, and then also thank you for BA Armory for putting this on their website as well. But yeah, can't say enough good things about this tool. All right, so I will see you guys next time. Please, if you enjoyed this video, if you got any value at all, like, subscribe to General Johnny Strategy, join the community of the Discord. We have all these tools hung up, easy access there, and we also have the battle plans posted. So like these battle plans that we went over today are going to be posted in the Discord under battle plans. So you guys can click on those links and access everything we went over today. So without further ado, I will see you guys next time.